Tell us how the events of 9/11 impacted your career.
I don't think it's at all an understatement to say that it was the single biggest factor in me pursuing a journalism career to the degree that I have and the way that I have. I'd been on the job for 3 weeks, my first job ever in journalism when the attacks of 9/11 happened. And so just at a time when I was sort of finding my feet as a young adult and figuring out who I was, I felt like I had the rug kind of pulled out from under me. As a woman, as a Muslim American, as a Pakistani American, everything sort of just fell apart to some degree. And journalism for me was the way to try to make sense of it. Going after the stories and going after the facts and figuring out what is really true here. What do we know, not what do we believe? And I think I found some sort of solace in that. There was a direction and there was a purpose to all that uncertainty.
And as a woman of Pakistani origin, did you get maybe harsh attitudes from people just because of who you were, covering a story so volatile and so sensitive? What was that like?
I think we forget sometimes, especially when all this time has passed, what it felt like in those early days. And it was a very uncomfortable time. It's still very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But as a Muslim American, as someone who is obviously not white and American, I stood out in ways that I really didn't like after then. I do remember feeling uncomfortable about myself. I remember I stopped wearing a small prayer ring that my grandmother had given me. I remember I didn't like the way people were looking at me on the subway. I got strange looks when we go out on some shoots. And a lot of it was me being a young adult and figuring out who I was and being uncomfortable anyway. But a lot of it had to do with the attitude in the country after 9/11, which still persists to some degree today. So I'd like to say that it didn't affect me. I think that it absolutely had an effect on how I see this country and the world that we live in.
Amna, you were granted access to an extremely dangerous territory, Waziristan, which is the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Tell us about that region and what was going on at the time when you entered.
So Waziristan at that time was really the hub of all the Taliban and Al-Qaeda activity in the region. And we had been negotiating with the authorities for years to give us access. They weren't letting journalists in, they weren't letting aid workers in. It was basically a no-go zone. So when they granted us access, it came through on a Friday night. They basically said you have 24 hours to get ready if you want to go. We had to make some quick phone calls to the bosses and to our families, and we went. And it was fascinating because this is a part of the country that even then and now has really been cut off. They haven't been invested in, the people there. There hasn't been development there. There haven't been schools or hospitals or even roads in a lot of it. It was kind of like stepping back in time.
And what was the purpose of your mission? What did you want to get out of this trip?
Like any trip, I think we just wanted to see what was going on. One of my very first bosses, is one of my favorite people in the world, said that journalism is a lot like being a good friend. It's 90% of just showing up. And we just wanted to show up. No one had been there before. No one from the outside had seen what it was like on the ground, had driven around on those roads, had talked to people in those communities. And I asked a lot of basic questions. This was the one place that more US drones were falling than anywhere else in the world. And I wanted to hear what people there had to say about that.
What was life like for you while you were there? I know you were hiking and going through rough territory, and you were pregnant. So that's a lot on your plate. So tell us what it was like for you over there.
It was a lot. I think I can safely say that it was uncomfortable. I was pregnant. Only my husband and I knew at that point. So my team didn't know. No one I was with knew. I was not feeling well. I was trying to hide it as best I could, and really just feeling very lucky to have that opportunity professionally and to be able to go back to a safe, comfortable life where I knew that my baby would be born happy and healthy. So it was sort of this incredible juxtaposition to see this life where people struggle for absolute basic things in life and know that within a few days, I would be back comfortably in my safe zone where my one day daughter would be raised. It was, I like to say that kind of the professional and personal tracks of my life came together in perfect alignment, and everything was very clear for the time that we were there.
How do you not be scared? How do you gather up the courage? You're in this environment, you know it's dangerous. There's got to be a part of you that's scared, but how do you kind of settle that down and move forward?
I think I probably am scared, but I don't really know how to admit that to myself. Honestly, when I'm out there telling these stories, I'm so intensely focused on the people that we're talking to. It's really hard to think about yourself and what could happen to you or what you don't have in life when you're surrounded by all these people who have a fraction of everything that I have been handed in life and who fight for that fraction.
What was one of the most emotionally impacting experiences you had while you were there?
In Waziristan, I think the thing that struck me most of all was that everywhere we went, from the infrastructure projects to the military bases, to the villages, to the public spaces that had been built, I was the only woman. I was the only woman I saw for the 3 days that we were in the region. And the women back home were alluded to, that my wife, is home doing this, or I'd like for my daughters to be able to go to school. But I was really the only woman who was out there, and I think never before has that sort of point where my life and the lives of all those women there are separated by the thinnest of lines been so very true. I mean, that's something we've always been aware of, my sisters and I growing up. But certainly I, as a female journalist, as a woman of color, have been aware of that, reporting in places around the world, that there's very, very little that separates all of us in this world. But in Waziristan, I think that really hit home because I was in my country. I was in a part of my country that had been underserved, and there were women in the buildings around me whose lives were incredibly different to mine. That really struck me.
Amna, another exclusive story that you covered was an interview with Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law. Tell us about that, and tell us about your experience going to his compound.
I don't think that any journalist can sort of look back on that time covering the days after the bin Laden raid and not get chills. It was just one of the most challenging and fascinating stories, I think, for so many people, and for a lot of different reasons. I mean, you had this movie-like kind of experience of the president laying out the raid as it had happened, and then the details we later found out about how the raid actually occurred, and then the fact that this family had been living basically in plain sight for years and years. It was sort of like the greatest mystery of our time, and it was just unfolding right before us. So look, as a journalist, as someone who's covered Pakistan, as someone who has personal investment in the region, it was just the culmination of just the most fascinating events all coming together in one place. The compound itself was, it was unremarkable as a building. I think we've heard this all before. It was probably made more remarkable by the fact that there were dozens of journalists camped out around it for weeks afterwards. But this was a story that had long legs. And months afterwards, when the wives of bin Laden and the widows of bin Laden had been held in Pakistan for months and months with kind of no one knowing what to do with them, we continued to follow up with the story to try to figure out, where are they going to go? You're talking about women who have long lives ahead of them, children, very young children, who are going to have memories of what happened in that house and the man that they knew as their father. What's going to happen to all of them? The brother-in-law came to Pakistan from Yemen to try to get his sister, who was bin Laden's youngest wife, released. And we had a chance to sit down with him and talk then. And like any brother, he just wanted his sister and his nieces and nephews to come home.
Osama bin Laden spent his final years holed up in Pakistan in this bare-bones compound. At his side until the moment he died, his youngest wife, 29-year-old Yemeni-born Amal al-Sadda, believed to be his favorite wife. She was the only one to stay with him and sleep with him on the top floor of the house. On the night of the raid, U.S. officials say, Amal threw herself in front of her husband, hoping to protect him. She was shot in the leg before bin Laden was shot and killed. After U.S. Navy SEALs flew away with her husband's body, Pakistani authorities picked up Amal, her 5 children, and others in the compound.
Were you able to see your sister today?
Now, her brother is in Pakistan, lobbying authorities to release his sister, nieces, and nephews so he can take them back to Yemen. In his first interview with an American television network, Zakaria Al-Sadda says his sister's health is deteriorating after nearly a year in custody. He's frustrated she and the children have been held for so long.
Why are they still holding your sister?
To this day, I don't know the reason. I asked her, maybe they're holding you because of information you have. She said she's already told them everything she knows. There's nothing else to tell them.
Al-Sadda has been allowed 8 brief supervised visits, bringing toys and gifts for Amal's children, between 3 and 12 years old. These photos, never before seen, were taken during one of those visits. Many of the children in custody, some of them bin Laden's grandchildren, have only ever known a life inside the compound walls.
How exciting. Your work is definitely exciting, Amna. Amna, your experiences are incredible. Your stories are inspirational, and you are an inspiration to our viewers, to me as a journalist. When I hear what you've done, I know that I have many, many, many more steps ahead of me to get to the point where you are, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do next.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.